One of the clips they released to advertise the film when there was only a matter of weeks left before its release involved the two derivative Jabba the Hutt slugs speaking to a kneeling Joel Miller, Reed Richards, Max Lord, Marcus Acacia Horatius, Oberyn Martell, Din Djarin. They order for his helmet to be taken off and then boast about the fact that he is now going to be exiled for revealing his face to them. Interestingly, they specifically mention that he's going to be exiled because he's revealed his face to an enemy, which is kind of contradictory to everything that we've ever heard about that rule. As far as I'm aware, in the Mandalorian show, you're simply not allowed to show your face to anyone, not just enemies. So his threat straight after that, suggesting that it doesn't matter because if he kills them all, then he's basically not shown his face. That idea doesn't really track, because is he suggesting that if anyone sees his face, he can just kill them and then it doesn't matter? And also, is he implying that he's killed people in the past just because they've seen his face? Regardless, it is laughable that the writers of The Mandalorian are still trying to make this arbitrary rule stick. At first, it did seem like a neat little quirk about the character's people that made him unique and slightly mysterious. Season 1 more or less committed to the idea that no one could see his face, and is probably one of the most consistent things about that season. However, we quickly see in Season 2 that there are many Mandalorians who don't give a solitary fuck about removing their helmets, regardless of whether or not they're in the presence of others. Bo-Katan's faction seem particularly blasé about it all. They then try to backtrack slightly later on in Season 3 when they're trying to force some kind of meaning back into the lore again. Turns out there are certain tribes of Mandalorians that do respect the customs and others that don't because they have their own separate ones. But by that point, it all kind of just seems a bit forced and arbitrary, and Mando's clan just kind of seems like a mental cult. Especially because after he's disgraced himself, Mando is told that he can simply wipe the slate clean by just going for a bath on Mandalore. The show tries to make out this is some kind of dangerous expedition because Mandalore is supposed to have toxic air. However, when Mando arrives, it turns out the air is fine anyway. And actually, even if it wasn't, the planet wasn't always toxic. What about when all the Mandalorians actually lived there on the homeworld? What if they broke their vow to keep their helmet on then? Could they literally just undo it by popping down to the mines for a bit and taking a dip in the sacred pool of forgiveness, only to then continue going about their Mandalorian-y day? Really bloody stupid. Anyway, in this teaser, they once again tried to make out like the helmet being removed matters even in the slightest, but it doesn't. Mando tries to act tough, even though he has the face of this man. I'm not being funny, but Pedro Pascal is absolutely capable of putting in good acting performances. Excellent ones, in fact. But we have seen so much of him in recent times, on and off the pitch, to force a sporting metaphor, that I can't help but sigh and think, good God, there he is again. It's very hard to take him seriously when he threatens to kill everyone in the room, especially when in this role in particular, he seems to bring as much energy to his performance as a doped up, date-raped quadriplegic sloth. The slugs are cringe as well. They're the two Hutt characters from that one episode of Disney Plus's hit show, The Book of Boba Fett. And we all remember them for that because, wow, what an incredible experience that was. For some reason they're speaking in English because the writers probably just couldn't be asked to translate the lines into Huttese, even though it absolutely would have helped them much more effectively recreate some of the presence that Jabba has in the early scenes of Return of the Jedi. They also naturally look just much more gloopy and fake, which of course they are. No chance of a genuine puppet being used, I suppose. Too much work, think you can do better? Well, newsflash, you didn't. And any work that was put in to create these two homeless snails was predictably foisted onto the CG team, as is often the case with these big budget slopsicles. We couldn't have had Cowboy Dave and Jumbo John designing an even more advanced, realistic version of the kind of two-man puppet suit that was used for Jabba in Jedi, could we? That would be far too much to expect, what with their hundreds of millions of dollars and incredible amount of manpower. CGI can be excellent, absolutely. There are plenty of times when it does a far better job of conveying visuals than practical effects ever could. Think of the Diplodocus scene in Jurassic Park, and the Balrog in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or even Gollum in the same films. But when you take into account the context of the cinematic era through which we are currently living, you can't help but feel a bit cynical about what the likely reality of the decision-making processes were in an instance like this. Back in 1983, a team of artists came together to create a complex, realistic and entirely unique puppet suit, in which two men controlled the arms, head, eyes, body and tongue movements manually. They did it live in the middle of the scenes. Jabba was an acted out character, not just in his voice, but also in his physicality. He had his own language, unique appearance, impactful mannerisms, and disgusting quirks, all of which combined to make him one of the most memorable characters in the Star Wars franchise. These two lazy CGI rip-offs simply exist to serve as another reminder to people who like the OT that they once enjoyed seeing Jabba the Hutt's physical body moving and shifting and blinking and laughing. No one will ever remember either of these boring, pointless blobs of frog food. They even had to have two of them to make the idea of another Mob Boss Hutt even slightly interesting beyond the fact that they are both Mob Boss Hutts. Stupid, fucking, brain-dead, lazy filmmaking. Please do better, Dave, you goofy, toddler-minded hack. And have some shame, John, you slimy, creatively bankrupt time thief. Anyway, a week or so before that clip, we got a snippet of the speeder chase scene with Mando, Zeb, and the ex-Imperial commander as they attempt to outrun a handful of stormtroopers shooting at them from behind. Regardless of the depressing fact that this is probably what the marketing team thought was one of the movie's funniest scenes, and the even more depressing fact that it probably is that this scene is ultimately just another moment wherein we are told, "Oh, look at baby Yoda, isn't he so cute? What a silly little 50-year-old baby who doesn't seem to understand basic instructions from a man who he has spent years traveling the galaxy with." Why does baby Yoda have to be an actual baby? As in, why does he have to walk, talk, and think like an actual infant child, instead of what he is, which is a creature from an alien race which, from what we know of it already, can live to around 900 years old? What's the point of living for 900 years if you still age in proportion with a regular human? Spending 50 years as a toddler is pointless. You don't gain anything from needing to be carried around, fed, and generally cared for by other beings that are actually much younger than you. What good does living nearly a millennium do if you can't spend that time honing the skills that most people only get a few decades to master? Yes, Grogu has the Force, and his species is supposedly particularly gifted in that in general, but he still babbles and waddles around like an 18-month-old child, while members of other species that are the exact same age as him are out having families and fighting in wars and conquering galaxies. And actually, you can't even use that argument. Oh, little baby Grok will do all those things eventually. One day he'll grow up and he'll have even more time than most people do to achieve anything he wants. That's not strictly true, is it? Let's say Yoda in Return of the Jedi is about as old as his species can grow to be. He seems pretty decrepit and run down by the time he eventually kicks the bucket in that film, so I think it's safe to assume that he is on the older side of things. In human terms, he's probably in his 90s, so let's be generous and let's say he's 100. Grogu is 50 years old. Yet, by human standards, he acts like a 2-year-old at most. And actually, 2-year-old humans talk a hell of a lot more than this shitty little goblin does. Let's say it took Grumpy Bumps 50 years to get to the stage of development that humans reach in 2 years. That would mean he will only develop to a mental age of around 36 by the time he actually dies at Yoda's ripe old age of 900. You see, Gropey is roughly 5.6 of the way through his life. A human at the same stage of development is around 2.5% of the way through. So, put simply, unless Groggle begins to suddenly start developing much quicker than he currently is, not only will he get to the end of his life quicker than the actual human would, speaking in terms of relative experience and growth, he will also only end up being about as wise as a man who has not even reached middle age yet. How fucking stupid do you have to be, Dave and John, to not realise that 50 does not divide into 900 that many times? Did Yoda just completely outdo himself in terms of how much knowledge and wisdom he managed to procure across many centuries of infancy, adolescence, and then adult youth? Did the withered, wrinkled, wise old puppet push the bounds of his species' capabilities and lead what must have ended up being an unprecedentedly advanced version of life for what should actually be quite a pathetic and dependent group of beings? Or is it actually the truth? And judging by the additional example of Yaddle's existence, I'm starting to think it probably is. Is it actually the truth that what we have all probably suspected might be the case anyway is factually accurate? Baby Yoda is retarded. Anyway, back to the movie. These are the clips that Disney and Lucasfilm decided would be the best advert for the first Star Wars movie to release in cinemas since The Rise of Skywalker came out 7 years ago. Oh boy. How thrilling. The Mandalorian isn't even an IP that people are particularly excited about anymore. According to Nielsen, Only Gen Alpha and baby boomers are still watching the show in 2026. So basically anyone from the ages of 14 to 61 don't give a monkey's bum about Disney Plus's flagship TV show. Anything that was interesting about the show died before the end of the first season. It went from a potentially interesting episodic adventure series about a lone bounty hunter navigating his way through some of the darkest and least explored aspects of the Star Wars underworld, to a boring, uninspired, run-of-the-mill action-adventure slopfest that doesn't push the boundaries or subvert expectations whatsoever. The show simply does what every other derivative, cynical, sludgy Disney Plus show does nowadays. Steal, deconstruct, disrespect, assassinate, butcher, burn, rinse and repeat. It pretends to be a show with an emotional through line and a buddy cop, father-son, found family kind of relationship. But there is nothing of substance under the surface. Manbun and Grumby can't speak to each other or communicate in any kind of substantial way. We never get any significant conflict between them, and we barely know anything about either of their personalities. They are each of them just an empty shell of a character meant to look either cool or cute in order to sell as many toys and t-shirts as possible to whatever gormless, gullible goo guzzlers still give a shit about this worthless, empty franchise. This movie adds nothing to the relationship between our titular Mandu and Grogu. The one semi-interesting scene between them is when Grotul is nursing Manju back to health in his very own DIY version of Yoda's little Dagobah hovel. Though the montage is kind of sweet in a superficial sense, we don't get anything more interesting from a character perspective than what we already know about the two protagonists' relationship. Grogu likes his daddy. Okay. Thanks for that, film. Beyond that, the scene basically just feels like a cheap key jangle with the aim of making you remember Return of the Jedi. And as for the rest of the movie, the same old things happen time and time again, just as they did in the show. Mandy tells Gringotts to stay with the ship. Mansell gets in trouble and Gringo has to save him. Mumbo gets shot over and 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 over again. Though he never looks for cover, just tanks each shot after another, straight in the armor, even though the armor actually only covers 60% of him if you're being really, really, really generous. And actually, the more I think about it, there is so much of Mando's body that is just completely unprotected. He's even protected while getting bitten and munched on by a huge snake creature, and never once actually feels like he is in any kind of danger or under any kind of threat of death. The writers just use his armor like a crutch, and as a result, Mankey is never in any kind of trouble at all unless the plot decides he needs to be. He has no internal conflict, no arc, no struggle. His supposed droidophobia is completely forgotten about, or ignored, and we see no one from the show who might give his character some history or semblance of the much needed depth that it so desperately craves. And Groggy has no character either. There are multiple shots throughout the movie wherein he is shown eating cutely while babbling or cooing. He doesn't actually contribute to the story, and I use that word with considerable caution. He doesn't add to it in any meaningful way, besides when the writers decide that actually he is allowed to be somewhat competent and intelligent now. Otherwise, he is just a 50-year-old infant who serves only to make the middle-aged women in the audience go, "Aww." Sigourney Weaver randomly plays a role as Mungo's handler on behalf of the New Republic, and good God. The less said about her pitiful, phoned-in, lazy-ass performance, the better. Why do you do this to us, Sigourney? Embo, Zeb, and Rota the Hutt all represent various pieces of character concept art that pop up periodically to exposit basic information to Mando, normally with a very flat and heartless voice acting performance. It is really getting quite cringeworthy now, just how much Dave Filoni thinks anyone else but him cares about his shitty, worthless, empty, pathetic, shitty, worthless, shitty characters. None of them possess any traits, ideas, flaws, backstories, or arcs that make them at all interesting to watch. All they seemingly exist to do is sell toys to silly, neurologically stunted 8-year-olds whose parents have too much money and not enough love to give. The story of the movie is a bland, safe, gutless, and cowardly fetch quest come rescue mission, which has about as many high-stake emotional beats as a game of Scrabble played between two blind, dyslexic goats. This movie is doomed to fail, and I'm sure that in a couple of weeks, this video will prove to have aged very well regarding that fact. The Mandalorian and Goku is as empty, soulless, boring and stupid as every one of its streaming show counterparts' pitifully pointless episodes. No one in the movie seems to want to be there, least of all the titular Mandalorian himself. Pedro Pascal seems to have quite literally phoned in every aspect of his performance, barely ever injecting anything other than a mild huff or vague disapproval into his slow, droning voice, and whenever we do see his face, he's emoting as though they turned the cameras on at the exact moment he was asked to be in the movie in the first place. The same goes for Sigourney, Rota, Zeb, and pretty much everyone else who has a significant speaking role in the movie. You get no impression that anyone but Dave Filoni wanted to make this film. And that suspicion is exacerbated by the knowledge that he did in fact insert himself into the final climactic dogfight as the character Trapper Wolf. What an absolute S-tier loser. I don't want to see anything made by this incompetent man-child again, and the same goes for his counterpart Favreau. What a crying shame it is that the man who is capable of giving us such an excellent movie as Iron Man is now reduced to shitting out disgusting, soulless, creatively dead movies like the live-action remakes of The Jungle Book and The Lion King, as well as this hunk of worthless cow dung.
What do you envision as because I'm sure that there's a balance between the studio and what you want to do in terms of, do you envision like every other year having a movie in theaters would be great? Do you envision like 2 shows a year on Disney Plus? Like, how are you thinking about the future of Star Wars and what fans can look forward to?
I think for me right now, like rather than dealing with hard numbers like that, I'm just looking at the stories and the potential and planning what I'd like to do. I believe in like having an overarching idea and then saying, okay, it's this many of that, and then we could have that. The stories that I'm kind of planning and architecting, and I look at other creative talents that bring us also great stories, and I just, try to find a way to make them all work. And there's a lot on my plate, which is exciting, not just in live action, but animation like Maul, which has been very fun, and they're driving forward. And I've got Ahsoka Season 2 coming, which is very exciting. I'm very excited about that. Sean Levy's, I think, doing a great job with Starfighter. So, there's a lot. All I can say right now, even in the re-release of Episode 4, there's so much exciting stuff coming already for Star Wars fans. But I said this earlier, fans have known me now for 20 years. I've worked and told Star Wars stories. So I think that they have a kind of good idea of what to expect.